I don't, I don't feel that's my brother who you've never met. By the way,
Didn't
so
we
we are,
meet
you
in
know,
Miami?
oh yeah,
We
you
met
did. Sorry. See,
yeah.
look, I'm forgetting everything these days. Yeah, yeah. So we're live with John Vallis, and yeah, Nick just walked by in the background there, and I was just about to say I'm exhausted. It's Friday. I'm exhausted today more than usual because I'm back at the gym. It's been a good summer. Traveled a lot. Didn't really do too much at the gym while I've been traveling, and now we're all the way in November. I'm finally getting a routine back, and I started lifting a little heavier again. Not that I lift anything incredibly heavy, but you know, just for me, it's
I'm sure
heavy.
you can throw up some weight.
Yeah, I can do a
Getting
little
that
bit.
vibe from you.
And then yesterday they programmed like a 40-minute cardio workout, which I just like, for me, I'll do it, but I will complain. I'm the guy who goes to the gym and complains about what is programmed for that day, but I'll do it because I want to suffer. Like I enjoy the suffering, but I'll complain and then I'll go and suffer and be happy at the end. But it was 40 minutes of like a 1K row, a 1K row, 1K run, and 1K on the bike, just like, you know, as many times as you can for 40 minutes. And I was just complaining. And today, I'm not going to lie, I'm exhausted. But you're bringing my.
I always work out before these because I feel like even if you're, oh, there's the doorbell, even if you're exhausted, or I feel like, especially if you're exhausted, if your muscles are tired, if you had a good like blowout of the lungs, your mind is more focused. Like you just can't worry about as much. And so I find it easier to dial in. So I just hit the gym as well.
Yeah, there you go. There we go. Showing the pipes. There we go. Yeah. Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah, I never thought I'd be doing all this stuff. So yeah, it's cool. Okay, listen, there's too much to, I need to jump in here and get to this with you. I think I'm pretty much turning into like a Bitcoin maxi. I guess I was like a Bitcoin. I knew I was like a long time ago, but this last few weeks, we're recording this just as this whole FTX debacle is happening and stuff. And I think when I first came into the Bitcoin world, I bought Bitcoin and then I heard of like Ethereum. So I was like, oh, okay, like everybody mentions this Ethereum.
Cool.
Sounds pretty cool. Like, I guess I'll get some. Like literally that was like the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, this is in 2020, I guess by the end of 2020 or into the beginning of 2021, I was like, wait a second, like, I don't understand. I understand Bitcoin pretty, what I thought at that time deeply. There's layers, as you know, but I thought, okay, like I understand Bitcoin for what I think I'm buying it for. I don't understand this other thing, or I don't understand these other things. And I just, at that point, I'm like, oh, I just like Bitcoin. I don't really like anything else. But I was kind of what I would say, I don't know if the wording is gentle about it or, I don't know how I would articulate the way I communicated that to people. I would just say, yeah, like I like Bitcoin. The other stuff's crypto. Don't talk to me about that. I like Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And for these reasons, here are my reasons. Now, after this whole FTX thing, I feel like I'm entering this stage where it's like my first reaction to this was when anyone asked me was to almost just bark at them a little bit and say, listen, it's time you grow up here. Like you need to grow up. Like we don't have time to waste. Like you need to figure this stuff out. So I've kind of, even though I would call myself a Bitcoin maxi for some time now, I feel like it's taking this different evolution. So I guess I wanted to hear it from you for people who don't know what that term is. Could you describe like what you think that mentality is or what it means to you? And just for people who may not have heard it. And then I would just like any kind of stream of consciousness that you have around that at this moment in time. And I guess I'm coming from a place, John, where that article that you wrote that I really, really like of monsters and maximalists. I really, really enjoyed that write up. So I guess kind of just reviewing that a little bit today, this is all on my mind. So with that, can you tell us about Bitcoin maximalism, your thoughts on it, wherever you want to go? I'm just curious.
Sure. Well, I guess what this all continues to reveal to me, and not that I needed another reminder, but it seems like everybody needs to touch the stove. That's number one, you know, and the toxic maximalist, which you were just kind of saying you weren't necessarily one, but maybe you're becoming more of one, right? That moniker exists because people have been trying for literally, you know, a decade now, you know, about a decade, to tell people that the phenomenon here, the thing of value here, the real paradigm shift here is Bitcoin. It's not this universe of other so-called cryptocurrencies. And The reason is because, well, there's a number of reasons. One, if we're dealing with the emergence of a new form of money, money converges on the best, right? In a free and open market, of course, not in the markets we have today, because every country is able to issue a fiat currency and enforce their use via legal tender laws, right? So, and via, you know, the requirement to pay taxes in them, et cetera, et cetera. But in a free market, money converges on one. And of course, the history of gold is a great example of that. Now, the reason why gold had silver as a, you know, why gold and silver kind of shared that moniker was simply the value to weight ratio of gold, right? So like you couldn't use gold in extremely small or smaller transactions. So you kind of needed the silver to complement gold. Whereas if you have a money that's infinitely divisible, so you can use it to buy a yacht or you can use it to buy an espresso, then you don't need a secondary form of money because it has that divisibility. So one is monies converge on one, and they're determined by their monetary attributes in an open market. The second thing is that the thing that people don't seem to understand about this phenomenon is that the whole point, and this is an uncomfortable truth for a lot of people, but the whole point of this is something that the powers that be, the regulators, the governments, the existing, you know, the legacy financial institutions cannot stop. And we call that censorship resistance. And when we say censorship resistance, we don't just mean a transaction can't be censored by the network. We don't just mean a transaction can't be stopped by the government. We literally mean when you custody this asset properly, you are the only one who determines what happens with it, and nobody can stop you from doing that. And the reason why I say that's uncomfortable is because we live in a world today where, I mean, we're awash in rules, basically. You know, the current monetary system has at least largely contributed to the size and scale of the institutions of government and bureaucracy that we have today. And most people have become habituated to that because they've been born into it. And a lot of people feel it's normal. So it's normal to censor transactions, or it's normal to cut off someone's bank account, or it's normal to say, you can't do this, you can't do that. And this form of money, by virtue of how it's designed, and if it's custodied properly, means that you have complete financial sovereignty, financial freedom, financial autonomy. And the reason why that's the case is because it cannot be censored on any level of its use. And again, the reason why I say that's uncomfortable is because that means someone can do whatever they want with their money if they're using Bitcoin and they're custodying it properly. And so all of these other cryptocurrencies basically think that it's about something else. It's about putting bananas on the blockchain. It's about a world computer. It's about, I don't know, there's 20,000 of them now, and they all dream up some narrative to make the case for themselves. But the reality is that some of them, well, none of them are as censorship resistant as Bitcoin, and none of them ever will be, in my opinion. And so that means just by virtue of that fact alone, Bitcoin's going to win in the long term. But most of them aren't censorship resistant at all. So they can be turned off on the protocol level, or by the foundation that controls it, or by the people that control most of the stake, or by the Amazon servers that they run on. There's a lot of choke points for most of these things. So they're not. And this whole term decentralization that, you know, we often hear bandied about today, that's not an end in itself. That's a means to an end. And the end is censorship resistant. You want something that's so decentralized that there's no single point of failure, that nobody can shut it off, that nobody can censor it, that nobody has the power to intermediate your relationship to that asset. So the asset, as far as you're concerned, is inviolable. Your relation to that asset is inviolable. And I just think a lot of the carnage we're seeing and a lot of the perversion that we're seeing is trying to fit that asset and all the Frankenstein offshoots that it's inspired into our understanding and into the legacy system that we were brought up in and that we've become habituated to. And it just doesn't fit, right? You can't tell Bitcoin, hey, you can't make this transaction. You can't sell to this person. Hey, you didn't pay, you know, your taxes or whatever. Like, Bitcoin just shrugs. It's not compatible with the existing measures of control in the existing system that we operate in. And I think a lot of people, one, don't appreciate the value of that. And as a result, they don't treat it that way. And that's why a lot, you know, people will store their Bitcoins on exchanges, whether it's FTX or Coinbase or wherever else. And they'll try to get, yield on them because, well, how do you get the yield? I don't fucking know, but it's 8% and I'll take it.
That's what you do. That's what you do. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in an attempt to have your cake and eat it too, to have the best of both worlds, let's say, and not really appreciate the value of Bitcoin in the first place, a lot of people get wrecked basically, because again, the systems are fundamentally incompatible. And unless you are Bitcoin is the only asset that you're, invested in, and unless you're custodying it yourself, you're going to fall victim to all this stuff, and it'll keep happening. And this is nothing new. I mean, Mt. Gox blew up in 2013, I think it was, maybe a bit, around that time. And at that time, it was only Bitcoin, and people that left their Bitcoin on that exchange rather than taking custody for themselves, they lost all their Bitcoin, and it's been in bankruptcy court or whatever for 8 years. And so people seem to have to learn the hard way that there's only one thing to really focus on here, and there's only one way to treat it, which is taking self-custody for yourself and making sure that you're completely sovereign over that asset. And if you are, it grants you a degree of freedom that, and this bleeds into the stuff that I've been focusing on a lot lately, that is quite powerful and transformational, like in people's lives, and having the ability to access that degree of freedom and that degree of certainty over the future, or if not certainty, a much higher degree of confidence about the future, that bleeds into your life and your anxiety and your ambitions for the future and how you think about the future. And then once you try to understand what this asset really is, the attempt to understand Bitcoin, as I'm sure you've witnessed a little bit,
mind blowing,
bleeds into an attempt to understand many other things in the world. And
people think you're correct. Like when you go into just on that note, when you start to go down that rabbit hole, when it's beyond money, because at first to me it was like, oh my gosh, this is better than gold. This is like the most amazing form of hard money that I've ever seen. And I kind of studied it from that angle. And then when you realize what this can maybe do to society and to people's lives, and then how that, if you extrapolate that forward 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, what that means for all of us, what it means for the world, what it means how we capture energy, what it means for the entrepreneur to get a true economic signal that is not manipulated through regulations or through manipulation like our current fiat dollar system is. So entrepreneurs can make the best possible economic decisions, not only for themselves, but maybe I can create something wonderful for you, John, because I have a pure economic signal and I have to produce so much value in the economy to convince you to separate yourself from your awesome, beautiful form of money, Bitcoin, that what I produce as an entrepreneur, whether it be a good or a service, has to be at the highest level possible. Otherwise, John's not going to give up his money because his money is so valuable and it's going up in value. And when you start going down that rabbit hole of like all the different things that this can help, that's to me when you just have this like explosion. And then it's when you have this realization, whereas I know some of my friends who are going to listen to this are going to think that I get crazy. I'm like, oh my gosh, it is the single form of truth. Like this is Bitcoin. And I know you stand by, and I know what you're all about. And you stand by that. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is like the benchmark to measure everything else in the world against. Like, this is it. But when you talk that way at first with people, they just think, or at least my friends anyway, they just like, Tom, listen, can you stand down? What are you doing?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I hate to be invoking Matrix quotes this early in the discussion, but not everyone's ready to be unplugged is a famous quote from the first Matrix movie. And it seems absurd to like, okay, like a new form of money has emerged. Why is that such a big deal? And you really have to study the history of money, and you have to understand how the attributes of a given money influence human behavior, influence the institutions that are built on top of that, be they government or financial or otherwise. And then once you start doing that and you start connecting the dots, you see just how influential the money really is to human action and society. And so everything we do, basically, I mean, every action we take has a value dimension ultimately, because, why do you zig when you could have zagged? Well, because you valued zigging more. Why did the chicken cross the road? Because he valued the other side of the road more. The value judgments are intimately wrapped up in every single action we take. And money is our ability to express intersubjectively those value signals in the form of price. And if that, and so it's basically, it's the matrix of society effectively. And depending upon the attributes of the money, how much can that matrix be perverted, distorted, corrupted? How much does it truly represent the value judgments of each individual? And the answers to those questions have profound implications. And the people that have studied Bitcoin and really gone down that rabbit hole are beginning to realize that. And that's, of course, why we all come off as like, crazy people, because we're the ones trying to say like, this is going to be much bigger than you think. This is not just about being able to get a yield on DeFi sushi swap at 8% a year. This is far more of a fundamental shift than that. And it's going to, and the other thing I think is important to note, we're talking about this thing, we're always kind of talking about it in the future. And I think where a lot of people get hung up is they'll hear this kind of rhetoric and they'll say, I'm not seeing that right now. And the point that has to be made to people is this asset is emerging from zero, right? In 2009. And certainly it's going to be mistreated. It's going to be misunderstood. It's going to be volatile. Like this has never happened before, a global monetization event for a new form of money. Gold monetized, as you know, the history of money in certain places, it was salt, seashells, cattle, what have you. And then in various places around the world at different times, gold emerged as the greatest form of money because of its attributes. And that's why even in these locations that were not communicating with one another thousands of years ago, gold still emerged as the most effective form of money. And it's because that our human interaction with its attributes elevated it to that point, to being most useful for expressing intersubjective value in a market. But it's never happened simultaneously across an interconnected world. And so we're seeing that for the first time, and we're seeing all these perversions and all this noise that's coming with it. And it's causing a lot of people, I think, to misinterpret it. And I think it would behoove people to recognize and appreciate that we're in the middle of its monetization. So it'll look things will look very different in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, in 40 years. And it would be unwise to just look at it as it is today and have that kind of influence your view of what it's going to be in the future. A very simple example of that is right now, Bitcoin is incredibly volatile, right? It goes up, it goes down. It's a drop in the bucket in the global asset market, right? If the global assets are like 500 trillion plus, Bitcoin is like 300 billion. Whatever macro events are currently taking place, and there are some significant ones, of course, Bitcoin is going to be affected by that. But the important point is that more and more people will start to appreciate its monetary attributes. They'll start to appreciate the benefits that it brings into their own life. And this process will just continue. And I suspect at a certain point in the future, it'll be far less volatile as it becomes more distributed, as more people hold it, as more people understand what it really represents, as more people treat it as money. And what I suspect is once we're in a hyper-Bitcoinized world, as we like to call it, where everybody holds Bitcoin as their dominant money and uses Bitcoin as their dominant money, whether that's 30 years or 300 years from now, we will see the purchasing power of Bitcoin increase as a reflection of the global productivity increase in a given year. Because instead of it, and I don't think we'll, like right now we're used to something like GDP, right? It was like, oh, this place grew 2% a year or 3% a year. I think that will be irrelevant in the future, because if governments, financial institutions, et cetera, can't siphon off the productive increases of a given market via printing money, then the productive increases in a market in an inviolable, incorruptible money are simply going to accrue to the purchasing power of the money. And so perhaps in the future, if we're in this hyper efficient market where where the cost of capital can be determined in real time all over the globe, where there's no siloing of different currencies, of different financial institutions, the entire world has access to this pristine form of money that can flow at the speed of light effectively, then I think that's going to dramatically increase global productivity. As you said earlier, I think it's going to change what we produce, because as we've artificially brought down the cost of capital, as we have in manipulating interest rates for the last, 50, 100, for all of our history in some way, shape, or form, that's changed the calculus of what gets produced, right? If the hurdle rate for money is
Yeah,
1%,
we produce garbage. Sorry, yeah.
exactly. If money's basically free, you're going to get a lot of garbage. If the hurdle rate is 10%, you're going to have to find a way to create something of extreme value that someone's going to be willing to, or that you're going to be able to make a return greater than whatever the hurdle rate is. And that's what the productivity accruing to the
Understanding
money
that
is
blew
gonna
my
force.
mind. Yeah, understanding what you just said absolutely blew my mind, because I couldn't get it. I'm like, I don't understand how this helps society, a hard form of money that maybe goes up in value. I don't get it. But when I understood that, like, oh my gosh, if the money goes up in value over time, the economy or the market must produce better quality things to separate the people from their money. And this might be something that you understood like 10 years ago. But for me, whenever I got that like a year ago or whenever it was like, oh my gosh, like we are ruining ourselves with all the inefficiencies around the world, like you said, with all the silos. So for example, the business that I'm currently in, helping people, like we started this business to help people buy income properties to front run government stupidity. Like that's ultimately why this business exists. I was in tech for 10 years and we're like, wait a second, the only way I can figure out how to front run the government stuff is these hard assets, and no one's really helping people. We'll be the ones to help people. And it really came from a place of service. We were like, hey, yeah, we are going to help people. They need to buy income properties to front run the government money printing. But this business really shouldn't exist. Like, can you imagine and now just to on that note, now I treat this business as like, it's this awesome to me. And for anyone who works with us, they're going to laugh when they hear this, but I treat this business as like, okay, getting people to Bitcoin is like a big leap. So I get people into the idea of owning hard assets to front run the government, right? And then we earn some fiat dollars as a business. And then we ourselves turn as many of those fiat dollars as we can into Bitcoin. And then I get an opportunity to say, oh, well, now you understand why real estate was good and why you're doing it. Here's the next step, like check out this Bitcoin thing. So I'm currently using this as like an honor, and in a weird way, John, I know that sounds weird, but I'm like currently using this as like this on-ramping system to kind of graduate people in peace, because it's often hard enough to get someone to understand they should buy a hard asset. You know, even that leap currently for a huge part of the population, we find that really challenging to get people to make that leap. So this is also my way. It's become my way of like, okay, this is how we're going to get people introduced to some of these concepts and a lot of the stuff that we do here. But back to what I was trying to articulate was that ultimately this business shouldn't exist. There shouldn't be a need for myself and my brother and the wonderful, like we have a big team here now to be doing this, and all these minds and computing power could be doing something else to further push humanity, society, the economy in a positive direction for all of us by offering something, back to your point, that is higher, that is, of higher quality, high enough quality that you would spend your Bitcoin to receive whatever good or service that we produce. Instead, we're kind of playing defensive, right? We're kind of playing defensive with the current fiat dollars and saying, hey, put your money in hard assets. It's a way to front run, the government and, do all these kinds of things. There shouldn't be a need for that in the economy. And how many people are employed in that type of manner in the economy? There's thousands and tens of thousands. So again, back to what you're saying, if you just redirect all that brain power, I'm not trying to say I'm the smartest guy by any means. I just mean, put that effort into something that can create a better world for all of us. It would be amazing. And it comes from the base of the system, which is the money. I'm just ranting now. I don't get the opportunity.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Yeah. You're one of the people that gives me the opportunity to just like rant like this. So thank you.
Well, rant away.
Yeah.
But of course I agree. And the very simple way of looking at this is, if the currency loses value, right? If it's inflated as it is everywhere, and if it has that capacity, then even if people aren't aware of the mechanics, there's going to be a financial incentive that they will almost pick up subconsciously via price signals that tells them the money is no good. You need to find another way to store value. And that's the world we live in. So you have, real estate and art and wine and pretty much anything else that has any degree of scarcity, right?
Yeah.
That has assumed the role that money once had, because the money is so broken. And so if we're assuming that we're moving into an era where the money is less viable, less dilutable, less inflationary than any money before, because it's absolutely non-inflationary, then I think we should assume that that monetary premium that's on real estate, that's on wine, that's on art, all this other stuff, will over time, of course, this is not going to happen overnight, but will over time basically be siphoned back into the money. And a lot of these things, now, again, we don't want to be too absolute about this. Like art is a very subjective thing, for example.
Oh, sure.
So
Yeah, of course.
You might pay 10,000 for a piece of art. I might pay 100,000. How much of that is a monetary?
Yeah, that's just economics. Sure.
Who knows? Right. But for things that are very utilitarian, or like a house, a car, these sorts of things, they should experience the greatest fall back to their utility value, because the monetary premium that they were used for is now a suboptimal, the store of value that they were used for is now suboptimal to another option that's on the market, which is Bitcoin. And of course, it doesn't come with all the other considerations, which, property taxes and upkeep costs and maintenance costs and headaches, and its physical location, inability to move it easily, all that kind of stuff. So Bitcoin outcompetes all of those former stores of values and brings it back into the money in such a profound and strong way that I think we'll see that monetary come off of a lot of goods and services. And to your point about, we were talking about how many ways in which this changes things. I mean, as you're saying, if the hurdle rate for production, for providing a good or services goes up so much, it begs a question, like, what are we going to value? How will society shift in kind of what it values most? And if the early cohort of people that really understand Bitcoin are any indication, it would seem that there's a devaluation of the material and the frivolous and all of that stuff. And there's an increased value ascribed to almost the intangible, right? Yeah. Of relationships, of lifestyle, family, of lifestyle, time, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so we'll probably see those things be valued more, and they will receive capital, and those other things valued less, and they will receive less capital. And, one of the common rebuttals to this is, well, if you're suggesting that because the money can't be manipulated or diluted, that the productive capacity of the market or the world is going to accrue to the purchasing power of the money every year, because you won't have that siphoning off effect of the government or whatever institution being able to print money, then you're going to get hoarding and you won't get production, and that's going to be bad for economies. This whole like kind of inflation is necessary narrative that people have been brainwashed on, and they fail to realize that you're not going to get the increased purchasing power without the production, because that's where it comes from. So once Bitcoin is evenly distributed, and it's not a thing that a get rich quick thing anymore, and it's just money, the purchasing power that it experiences will be a direct result of the increase in the productive capacity of the world or the market in whatever given time frame. And so you needn't worry about hoarding because the money is deflating, let's say at 5% a year, because that's a direct result of the production that did occur. And so I just want to throw that out there, because a lot of people are still stuck in this mindset where a little inflation is good. We need a little inflation for economic growth, and it's
a little theft is okay. Yeah,
exactly. It's such a, and it's so ingrained. You
it's
ask
so
a lot of
ingrained.
people, like, hey,
it was ingrained with me. It was ingrained with me, and I studied this stuff. I studied gold and silver for, I want to say, and money for 10 years. I still was struggling. So no, I get it, and that's why I think some people hearing you maybe for the first time, it can be a lot to take in. Like, something is so obvious and you articulate it so well. Someone hearing that, I can understand and sympathize with the confusion that you might have, but I would challenge anyone listening to this to go down that rabbit hole and try to prove for yourself why or why not what John said, agrees with your current views on the world. It's worthwhile.
And if I can add one piece to that, another one I often hear, and this comes from a lot of the so-called economists, the fiat economists around the world, is, well, we need more fine control of monetary policy, because what if there's a big unexpected event, whether it's a financial catastrophe, whether it's an earthquake in Chile or whatever, we need the ability to see ourselves through that by manipulating the money. And once you begin to understand money, it's such an asinine assertion, because what you're saying, so an earthquake happens in Chile, and what is money ultimately? Money is where all the preferences of every single actor in a market and the state of the natural world converges into a signal. that tells you this is the most pristine, harmonized state of the world as it is this very second. And what it does is when circumstances change, be they people's preferences or events in the natural world, that balance gets rebalanced to account for that change. And what you're suggesting by expanding the money supply in response to a catastrophe is saying, hey, there was an earthquake in Chile and that's affected copper prices, let's say, but that's very disruptive. So let's print a bunch of money so that we are able to maintain stable prices. So what you're effectively doing there is you're impeding the ability of that price signal to communicate truth to the market. You're introducing noise into that for an arbitrary reason that is ultimately detrimental to what you're seeking. And what you're seeking is the optimal balance of everyone's wants and needs and preferences in a market in relation to what the natural world can currently provide. And you're trying to find the optimal balance. And by introducing noise, by changing the calculus, by trying to act like something didn't happen, you're impeding that process from happening under the guise of stabilizing things, when all you're actually doing is making things less stable. And to your point earlier, the fact that this has run for so long, and the fact that, fiat currencies have been, the status quo for so long, we get this hyper financialization of the world, where, as you said, like, so many people are engaged in finance, and everyone, doesn't matter, like if you're just a, regular Joe plumber, you have to either push yourself out on the risk spectrum to maintain your capital. So like you were saying about your own business, you have to engage in real estate investing, or you have to engage in the stock market, or, and this is the case for most people, you have to hire somebody else to do it, because just to maintain the value of your capital, you need to take more risk. And this creates
sounds like such a joke.
Right. And this creates a massive universe of unnecessary complexity and financialization that is itself making the whole system more fragile, more fragile rather than less fragile. And I think, we're kind of the chicken's coming home to roost right now in the world. I think the fragility of global financial markets and the fragility of global economies is starting to make itself more known as a result of that. And, so it could be a challenging time, but again, thank God that we now have a life raft that is so available to everybody. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to understand Bitcoin. You get yourself your 12 words, right? You write them down, you secure them, and then you slowly siphon your capital from that fiat, that fragile, that manipulated, distorted world. And you slowly, or rapidly, up to you, put it into the more pristine, the more secure, the more truthful world. And the crazy phenomenon is that if you do that, and that simultaneous to doing that, you learn about these things and you keep going down that rabbit hole, you might find that the benefits are more than just financial, as we alluded to already. You might find the benefits bleed into the personal, into your understanding and your perspective of things and how you value things. Because at the end of the day, like we just said, I think this will cause a shift in how we value things and how society determines or defines what progress is and what gets produced and all those things.
I also think there's, John, I apologize for interrupting. I also think it gives a person such a powerful sense of confidence, because they are custodying something that they, whether they believe it themselves or, they've concluded that this is the best form of money that I can have, and I'm custodying it myself personally. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of power or confidence that comes from that. And I'm using power intentionally. Like, I mean, there is a sense of power that comes from knowing, hey, it doesn't really matter what's happening on, this exchange is blowing up over here, or some countries having problems over there. I might sympathize with people who are, losing life savings. And of course, I have feelings for this, but for yourself, there is just a certain sense of, it's more than confidence. Like, it is to me a sense of power. Like, I feel like you feel like you're in control more of your own life. And that seeps into other areas of your life. It seeps into how you treat your friends and your family, and just your outlook on the future. And I think right now, with the abstraction layers that we have in government and We talked about financial services, like we talked about real estate there a little bit, but the financial services globally as a whole, like how many people imagine all the minds working in financial services. If we just geared those minds to nuclear power or efficient energy or whatever, like where we could be as humanity, instead of all of us chasing what we were talking about earlier. Right. So I just feel like, yeah, it's this weird thing. And I guess I don't know fully how to articulate it. That's why I'm just kind of stuck on the words of power and confidence. I'm still going through it myself, John.
Well,
But there's something there,
a lot of people report. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, a lot of people report, this feeling of Bitcoin Zen, because when you have that degree, let's use an example that's relevant to the two of us. The trucker convoy earlier this year.
Yeah.
If you donated on GoFundMe, if you were part of a Bitcoin donation or whatever, you were at risk of having your access to your money, what you thought was your money, cut off for God knows how long, for what for no reason, no explanation, no warning, just snip, done. And of course, and the flip side of what you were just articulating is responsibility. And as an aside, this is why we see these FTX and all this blow ups, because people aren't willing to take the that power. With great power comes great responsibility, right? And that is the flip side of this. Yes, it can deliver to you a sense of power, sense of peace, a sense of security, a sense of calm, a sense of zen in the face of the chaos of the world, because nobody can disintermediate you from that asset if you take the responsibility to handle it and custody it properly. And that's where most people fall down. And it's because they don't recognize where the true value of this thing is. It's not because, oh, cool, cryptocurrencies are the next internet and I'm going to get rich by investing in them now. No, the value is that you get to have a direct, inviolable relationship with your money now for the first time in basically human history. And that is an incredibly profound notion, but it does require a shift in mindset, because most people have grown up in a world where most things that have any degree of complexity, not that securing 12 words really does, but that there's a perception that it has complexity, but most of those things we delegate to other people. Send the money to the bank. They'll secure it. They'll make sure the robbers don't get at it. The FDIC will back me up.
Yeah, if you forget your password, you can get it reset.
Exactly. And then when you start thinking about how that becomes habitual, then you look at other areas and see how much are people doing that to their healthcare? Quite a bit, probably. They're not taking care of themselves, and then they show up at the hospital when things go wrong and say, "Hey, fix me, doc." And so how has this inculcated into people a culture of not taking responsibility for things and delegating responsibility? And I think this is precisely why when people make that switch in the form of money, which is basically their means of moving through the world, so it's perhaps the thing that's most important to take responsibility for, when they make that switch, they start to make that switch in other areas of their life. They want to take more responsibility. They want to be more in control. They want the sovereignty back for themselves for a broad spectrum of things, be they healthcare, relationships, business, etc. They recognize the danger of relinquishing control, and they want to take that greater responsibility. But that's quite a significant shift in perspective, and not everyone is ready to do it off the hop.
And it's tough to convince people just off the hop, like you're saying, to get there, But yeah, like when this year, I've been traveling a little bit more than usual. And it is weird, like when you feel like you are custodying some form of monetary asset, like, when you have your own Bitcoin, you're custodying it, and you're anywhere in the world, you feel like you can get direct access to it. Whereas before, if I was traveling in Croatia, and sometimes I'd think, oh, geez, if like my Visa card gets shut off or my debit card gets shut off, it's going to be a little bit of a pain to get access to like the Canadian banks because I'm over here. But it does give you a real sense of freedom when you have some Bitcoin that you can access anywhere in the world, and more people are transacting directly in it. And I think if you are not in this world, you think no one is. Right. You don't think people are, but there's more and more of us out there that are. And that's actually what I wanted to ask you, maybe actually just to transition a little bit. I think you're exposed to a lot more of these things than I am, but can you talk about what you're seeing, maybe some of the stuff that excites you about where people are starting to use Bitcoin a little bit? Like, I don't know if it's going to be Stacker News or Fountain, or recently you did a podcast. I don't want to mess up his last name. It's Tom, and I can't pronounce his last name. I'm going to mess it up.
Oh,
but it's Satzback.
I'll probably mess it up too.
Yeah, but are there any of those ones, just to change our conversation a little bit, of where you're seeing people using this stuff that's kind of got your attention a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Before I do, the final point on what we were discussing.
No, you keep going. If you want to go another half hour on this stuff, you just go.
All right. Well, I recognize that in these conversations, we are cheerleading a lot, right?
Totally.
And part of
and
that
sometimes
is
pounding the table cheer.
right. And that's because as you go down that rabbit hole of understanding and changing your perspective, it accelerates and there's no going back. So you just keep going down. And so to someone who's yet to embark on that journey, it can seem like we're failing to appreciate certain aspects of this whole phenomenon or where they might be. And so I just wanted to say, when we talk about, the hurdle rate being higher and people having to provide more value in a market as a result of the money being improved and having to provide more value in order to succeed in production or business or what have you, and how things have become so financialized and all the rest of it, of course, there's going to be investment and, probably even lending and stuff like that in the future. But just imagine a world where that Joe Plumber, instead of having to go out on the risk spectrum, whether it's in a registered retirement savings account or any other sort of financial product, what if most people in the world, all they wanted to do was devote their time and energy resources to producing something of value for someone that's willing to pay them, and then taking that payment and putting it in the so-called bank, i.e. their own custody, and not having to do anything, knowing that it's going to be there for them when they need it in 10 years, 20, 40, 50 years time. Because you can imagine, what if, 50 years ago, you were that Joe Plumber and you hated banks, you didn't trust anybody, you weren't savvy to the stock market, and you just put it in cash under your mattress. You're wrecked right now. Your entire life savings are absolutely decimated. And so I think it's going to be such a refreshing and such a healthy change where people can once again work, store the fruits of their labor in a money that's going to, let's say, increase in value, increase in purchasing power slowly, and they're not going to have to take extra risk in order to save, because that's what everyone has to do today.
Or worry. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And that goes back to the calm and peace aspect of it. And then we'll see that obviously, based on people's time preferences and their amount of capital, you're going to say, Tom might say, hey, I really like that business idea. I'd like to invest in your business. Of course, that's still going to take place. But the point I'm just trying to make is that it's going to be, all that risk taking is no longer going to be necessary. And as a result, it's going to be dramatically diminished. And as a result, I think we're going to see people with more security and calm and confidence about their lives in the future. And then we're going to see capital, one, be priced in real time as it should be. None of this artificial interest rate set by 12 dudes in a dark room somewhere, but it's actually going to be, we were talking about, the function of money and prices before. Well, the cost of capital is going to be performs that same function, right? It's taking all the time preferences of all capital holders, savers in the world, and based on how much they're, what those time preferences are, how much they're willing to risk, how much they're willing to lend, all this kind of stuff, you're going to have capital markets that are, again, at the speed of light in real time, globally determined. And how much efficiency is that going to bring to global production and to global investment? I mean, again, that's a very difficult point to quantify, but we are so far from that today. I mean, just imagine arbitrarily saying the cost of capital is 3% for the US dollar, and as a result, for most of the world, versus every single action taken by every single money holder in the market all over the world, producing a cost of capital that is perfectly truthful to all the circumstances of the world. And how well is that going to harmonize preferences with production and value and all of that kind of stuff? It's going to be very, very interesting and a huge improvement from where we are today.
And I think we're going to get there sooner than I once thought, because I think it's just last week or this week, Preston Pish had a gentleman, and I feel badly that I don't recall his name, but he's in the energy sector. And he was talking about how there's like a 10% basically waste of inefficiency on just the cost of capital that's being sent around in that industry to get energy from whoever's producing the energy to the ultimate retailer or the consumer of that energy, and that they're toying around with using the Lightning Network to stream payments back to the producer of the energy in real time. And they're, by just streaming that directly between the end user and the producer of the energy, they're going to be able to save a 10% cost just because there's just that much waste. So to your point, when you get a form of money that can travel at the speed of light and doesn't have to go to a centralized authority and all these different levels to actually transact, it's going to save us a lot of money as well. And then so I think we're going to get to a place that I thought was going to take longer, sooner than we think, just because of technology and network effects. I really now believe that, because before I thought, 10 years maybe before we see anything really interesting. And I'm like, no, this is going to be sooner than that. And then on the second thing, when you were talking about people like, the plumber who's making their money and that kind of stuff, when I was growing up, I got the opportunity, and I'm very thankful for it, in the early 1980s, to go to my father's village in Croatia, outside of Split on the Adriatic coast there. And then when you have a village and you watch how a village operates, and I remember this pretty vividly as a kid, there was much older people in that village, and they were the wise elders. They didn't worry about food. The rest of the community took care of, feeding them, and they had the opportunity to relax and maybe pitch in if they wanted to ride a horse or load up a donkey with potatoes and go, whatever they were doing, to take care of the chickens. They could kind of pick and choose, and they could pass on their wisdom, which is what I saw them doing a lot. They would say, hey, the reason the horse, they would have a horse kind of run on, I guess it was wheat. And I think it was to separate the seeds from the wheat. Someone else is going to listen to this and just laugh at me, because I don't really remember exactly what was going on. But I remember the wise kind of elders, or the older people of the community, they would just pitch in and give the younger people who were doing that the guidance on, like, hey, you're doing that wrong, do it this way. And they were the wise elders of that village, and they weren't really worried about their next meal, because the way the villages work, you always took care of everybody in the village. And if I extrapolate that out to a global economy, I'm like, we don't get that at the global economy, because our wise elders now, and it hurts me, they're coupon clipping, or they're trying to get to the lowest, cheapest grocery store to buy the most, unhealthy food, because that's all they can afford, because their money is going down in value. So we don't get this benefit of the wise elder. And I think that's lost, especially in North American society. Whereas I really got the opportunity to see the value of that. That's how you pass things on from generation to generation. It can be very helpful. These are teachers that we've now lost in today's society because of the money. Because of the money, we have lost the wise elder, especially in North America. So when I hear you say these things, like, it just resonates with me really, really deeply. I think about my father. Now I'm going off. I often rant, but John, for some reason, I rant more. But my father, like, I'll just never forget how hard my father worked when he came to this country. And I remember when he was able to save up $10,000, and that was in the 1980s. Now, if he gave that to my son, his grandson today, the value of that $10,000 that I saw my father get up at 5 a.m. in the middle of winter, go put drywall up, get the snow off the drywall, working in the dark with the wind blowing through these construction sites, and how hard he worked every day to save up that money, and then to save it and maybe pass it on to his grandson. But the value of that $10,000, of that measurement of his time and labor, it's just gone. And it irks me to no end.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I didn't know I was going to get into this stuff.
No,
John,
it's good.
So,
it's good. Let me riff on it a little bit too. So, I mean, this is just another wrinkle in the implications of upgrading the form of money, right? That most people wouldn't think of. Like, what are you telling me, that money is going to somehow influence the integrity and the security and the foundation of the family and all the effects that has? I mean, as you say, one of the effects of the money deteriorating is that people have to work longer, right? They have less capital to see them through their later parts of their lives. As a result, they have less time and attention to devote to other pursuits that they might want to engage in, which is maybe the transfer of wisdom from one generation to another. If a family, has to have two parents working now as a result of the manipulation of the money, then what does that mean for the cultivation of and development of the children? Probably not as good. What does it mean for the stress that's placed on a family and the impact that might have on the marriage and single family homes, et cetera? Probably not a good impact. And so, as you can see how it affects so many different things. Alternatively, if you could say, oh, well, and Saylor makes a good point often, that if you did want to do what you just said, which is hand down money or capital from generation to generation, what are you going to do it in? I mean, real estate, that's a cost over time. Now, maybe the increase in value in the current landscape exceeds the cost. And so that's, it's decent, but it's only in one place. And a lot of places around the world have political problems and you have to flee. And so it's not very flexible in that capacity. Gold has been confiscated in pretty much every country in the world over the last 100 years. Of course, you're not going to do it in cash. So how do you have generational security? How do you continue to improve the foundation of a family generation to generation, rather than it disintegrating? You want it to become more integrated. You want it to become stronger over time. And in an environment where now you have the tool to do that, how is that going to influence the strength of marriages, the development of children, the treatment and the life and the wisdom of elders that we're able to access? And in my opinion, all of that will become greatly improved and greatly enriched. And so we'll be able to access more of we'll be able to build stronger, more integrated families that will build stronger, healthier, more integrated communities, jurisdictions, provinces, nations, what have you. And I think we'll all be able to pursue things that are of greater value, whatever you might believe that to be, as a result of not being in such a state of deprivation as a result of being stolen from through the devaluation of the currency. And again, like most people wouldn't think that the quality of the money has anything to do with marriages and child development and passing down wisdom through the ages.
It sounds ridiculous at first. Yes, agreed. It does.
Yeah. And to your point about this happening more quickly, again, I don't make predictions because we live in a kind of a clown world and who knows how things are going to happen. But I think if the point is correct that capital efficiency capital is so much more efficiently treated in this Bitcoin world, right? Where capital can flow more quickly and efficiently, it can be priced more quickly and efficiently, and the participants in that market can't be stolen from, so they're more able to express value, they have more confidence in the system, et cetera, et cetera. How quickly will that emerging system outcompete the extremely hampered and distorted legacy system? And right now it's still small, but I think the efficiency gain is so great that, it could surprise us all in how quickly it takes place. And it may be one of those scenarios where there's just a breaking point, basically. You think the Bitcoin holders that are actually engaging in a Bitcoin economy are 1 million people or 10 million people around the world. Well, once it hits 500 million and it's 100 times more efficient than the legacy system, well, that stampede into that more efficient system could be quite dramatic, and it'll create all sorts of problems, and there'll be all sorts of speculation, and it's going to,
like we're seeing now.
Yeah, exactly. It's most likely going to be somewhat tumultuous, which is why there's such an imperative for people to understand this as soon as they can and begin, making the transition for themselves, begin, storing some of their wealth in an asset that can't be violated, that they secure and they custody, and nobody can take from them. I mean, that's really step one. Get your 12 words and start putting some Satoshis on them. And then, follow along. There's lots of information out there, lots of people talking about this stuff, books, podcasts, articles, documentaries, all that kind of stuff, to get more familiar with this, because I think we would both agree this can't be stopped now. The genie's out of the bottle. Yeah. And so you better get on board, the sooner you get on board, the less pain you're probably going to experience, both from the legacy system or speculating in all this nonsense around cryptocurrency. It would be great if people could avoid pain. Most often, like I said at the beginning, people have to touch the stove, but all the better if not.
I wonder if North Americans in general, Canadians, Americans, and if I just focus on Canada for a second, if you're born in Canada and you've lived here your whole life, it's kind of worked for you. It's kind of worked.
Yeah, totally,
You got education, it's been safe, the banking system has been good. So you really haven't had to go down this rabbit hole. And I just wonder if there's just this flippening where the rest of the world gets it. Like if you're in Argentina, you understand inflation. You just naturally understand inflation. If you're in other parts of the world where you can never have a bank account, and now you can custody some money yourself, you get this. So I just wonder, if it's almost been a detriment to Canadians or Americans as well, that everything's kind of sort of worked for their whole lives, especially, if you're 30, 40, 50 years old, things have been pretty, quote unquote, pretty good. There's been a lot of bad things too, but in general, I guess you could say it's pretty good. And I wonder if that's just holding people back, and it's just not, it's like it's worked okay for long enough, kind of leave me alone. I don't have to think about these things. But then when this flipping happens, I wonder if it's like North Americans are the last to figure it out, or Europeans as well. I guess like Western Europeans, at least I could throw into that. It'll be interesting to see what that happens, because I think that's what happened a lot with the trucker convoy here in Canada. I feel like people were just, there was a bigger segment of the population than I thought that were just okay with whatever the government said during that. And I think it's because it came from a place of like, well, the government's kind of sort of done okay for us, so whatever they say goes. You know what I mean? So I just wonder if it's kind of holding a lot of people back, that it's kind of worked, and it's almost like you need to have this rude awakening. To really understand the 12 words and custodying yourself, and to go through the quote unquote hassle of custodying yourself. You just haven't had to have that responsibility. But you come to a conclusion at a certain point, once you study this enough, that you just must do that. Like you have to do that. I consider it now like starving the beast. To me, it's like, this is starving the beast every time. And I know that sounds ridiculous.
You all radical, you.
Yeah, yes, I know. Anyone listening to this that doesn't know, like, who is this? Who's this person? But that's how I view it. I'm like, the only way to do this is we're going to starve the beast. We're going to starve the beast. And when I say we, I mean all Bitcoiners together who don't know me, but all of us together. When you buy some Bitcoin, I guess I should say exchanging some fiats for some Bitcoin, you're just starving the beast.
Yeah. And there's two things about that. One, I agree with you that a lot of people, like they even in response to the trucker convoy or the rhetoric used by the government, they don't see it. And part of that is because it really is a type of spell, because as we were saying about it, like, if you have the power to arbitrarily conjure up capital and allocate it at will, that's an incredibly powerful force of direction, because you're directly intermediating the price signal in your favor along the lines of what you think should happen, should be created along the lines of your values. And so the market can't help but respond to that, can't help but gravitate to it, because that's what we're all chasing, right? You're chasing that signal, that value signal. And the one who gets to distort it the most accrues a tremendous amount of power, and it creates this artificial landscape, right? Like a lot of people won't, may have a difficult time, seeing what I'm saying here, but the world is going to look very different, because how much of the world that we exist in, how much of the capital that's allocated in Canada, for example, is allocated by one way or another by the government. So as an employer, or as, infrastructure and public works projects, as social care, as how they take taxes, both direct in the form of, normal taxation, and indirect in the form of inflation. How much capital are they allocating? And how different will it look, as you said, when the beast has been starved and people and individuals are allocating capital based on their savings, and that beast no longer has the capacity to allocate capital? Things are going to look different, because individuals make different choices than large bureaucratic, governments and whatever their interests and ends may be. And again, in particular in Canada, because Canada, I think, has an above average trust in government, and kind of leans quite big government in general. And so when you drop a term like starve the beast, I think people are gonna be like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, what happens when you custody your own money? It can't be surreptitiously taken from you via inflation. And and a little bit out in the future, if you're operating in a circular economy where you're exchanging, your services, goods and services for Bitcoin, and you're custodying it all yourself, how are they getting their pound of flesh on that? If we play this out, and the answer is if you can't inflate the money and steal purchasing power and wealth that way, and if it's way, 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 way harder to tax, because we've all had this experience, Tom. You go to your barber, you pay him $20 in cash. He doesn't record it. It's off the books, right? What happens when the entire global economy, the base monetary standard for the world, is cash effectively and treated as cash?
Yeah.
It's way harder for that beast to feed itself. And what the necessary outcome is it for it to shrink. And so governments, whether they like it or not, and this is why so many are going to likely be opposed to it ultimately, it's that governments are going to have to shrink because they've been high on the hog for so long by those two methods of theft. One, taxation. There's an argument there that it's not theft. Maybe you think it's voluntary, you engage in it, although I would think most people would rather pay less and think they should pay less. And the other one is involuntary and surreptitious and unknown to most people, which is through inflation. And when both of those things are either made impossible or way, way, way harder, then that institution can no longer fund itself. And it has to shrink down to whatever size the market determines is valid for it to be, to act as some form of arbitrating authority, whether it's other forms of property rights like real estate, et cetera, whether it's in relation to security and defense, who knows, right? There's a lot of questions to be answered, but the punchline is they won't be able to fund themselves to the extent that they are today. That means they must shrink. And, I doubt most are going to go quietly into the good night on that one because nobody likes to give up power.
Okay, yeah. So it's right on that note then where I get most of the pushback. Are you still okay for time? Can I bug you for
I'm
a few
good,
more
man.
minutes?
As long as you want to go. I'm ready.
It's right on that point where I get to some of these conversations with some of my friends where people then get scared right there. Yeah. Because they're like, okay, Tom, how does the existing status quo lash out at the population? So how does the existing government lash out and try to stop that from happening? And I think that's what holds a lot of people back because they're like, well, why am I even going to bother going down this Bitcoin rabbit hole? Whereas the government's going to realize what this is at some point, and they're just going to say, get it back on the exchange if you're custodying it yourself, or we're taxing it in a windfall tax at 90%. Like they're going to annihilate this thing.
Yeah.
What do you say to people who say, well, that kind of scares me. I'm not going down this rabbit hole because what's the point? They're going to come at this hard. And maybe with everything going on right now, as we're recording this, maybe we might be entering that phase right now. How do you respond to people?
I can't help myself in using another Matrix quote, but fasten your seatbelt, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye.
Yeah. But, so
look,
we're going down a rocky. This is going to happen whether you're on board or not on board.
Maybe we'll be surprised to the upside. Who knows? Because at the, Jeff Booth always reminds everyone of this point. And he's right. There is no they, right? Like those people in the government and behind the central bank and all this stuff, 99.9% of them think they're doing what's best. They're trying to do what's best. They think they're good people. They're not trying to be a big oppressive monolith that's like making everyone's lives worse, right? Good
point. Yeah.
That's just the outcome of a perverse system that's predicated on corruption, basically, on false premises, on corrupt or improper principles, let's say. And so part of me hopes that enough of those good people will realize how they're contributing and that they'll want to, they won't participate in that degree of crackdown. Now, maybe the more realist aspect of me says, things are going to be messy. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of hardcore Bitcoiners are anonymous, fully anonymous. They interact on Twitter anonymous because from day one, and you can look back at the early Bitcoin talk forums online from 2010, 2011, and people very quickly realize like, hey guys, what happens when we have a form of money that dramatically outcompetes all other forms of monies and nobody can stop? You think the powers that be are going to be, the legacy system, however you perceive it, are going to be happy about that? Do you think they're going to just let that happen? And the answer is likely no. And so, it comes down to how much do you think this is worth? Like, is this a cause that you think is valid enough to inconvenience you to some degree? I mean, we all have to make that choice for ourselves. I mean, I'm adaptable and ready to do whatever I must to continue participating in this and not be penalized or punished for doing so. But they're probably going to try to cast a pretty broad net. And you see that already, as you said. I mean, a lot of exchanges, if you want to send out over $1,000, you have to, say where it's going and all this kind of stuff. The EU seems like they're going to bring legislation around, using so-called self-hosted or unhosted wallets, basically self-custodying. And so they're going to try to get their tentacles in this. But like the point I made earlier is that Bitcoin used properly is entirely incompatible with existing systems of control and the legacy system generally. And so, it's whether it comes to a head in one big thing, probably not, because but over time, there's going to be this tension between the two, and people will get caught up in that net. And some people already have, unfortunately. But I think if we continue to make the case around the principles and the values that this thing is predicated on, that it should be the case that that everything that a person engages in with their money would be voluntary. Why should the government be able to steal, unbeknownst to people, their purchasing power that they accrued by giving their time and their energy and the resources to get it? If that's a relationship of slavery, in my opinion, because if one party to that relationship can produce something without cost, and the other party has to devote a high cost, which is their time and energy resources, then eventually you have such an imbalance that it's in effect a form of slavery. And we're seeing fairly developed signs of this today, where there's such a widening wealth gap, where because the people that are closer to that monetary spigot, because people that are at the top of that financial pyramid, they've been able to siphon off so much wealth from the people that are doing a lot of the work. And I'm by no means a communist or anything like that. I'm just saying that people should be able to retain the fruits of their labor. Is that not just a simple, defensible premise? And I think it is. And so it's on us to continue making that case, but also I think the people that are involved in this, and the people that really believe in it, and the people that are building solutions, they're going to help this asset express its value over time. And I honestly just think, however that negotiation happens, ultimately it's going to be too unstoppable, and it's going to outcompete the legacy system too much. And how that takes place, I mean, I think you've read The Sovereign Individual. I think I saw it on your bookshelf last time we spoke.
Love it.
But that's just beginning to play out right now. So over the last 2 years with COVID, a lot of people, got fired, or, they left their jobs or their homes and stuff like that. And they went to jurisdictions where they had more freedom. And then now we're seeing places like El Salvador and Madeira and some other places saying, we're going to be, pro Bitcoin. This is where you can come, and, we're not going to treat you like second-class citizens. We want you here. We want you here because you're smart and you're productive and you're ambitious and you're law-abiding and all the rest of it. And so come here with your capital. We value freedom.
So you think
too,
there'll
basically
be some game theory to this? You think it'll be tough for them?
Inevitably.
Yeah.
Because if
it'll be tough to put up.
If the big monolith, right? If the big government, Canadian, EU, American, whatever, starts being more and more overbearing in this regard because of the threat that this poses, well, that's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin that you mentioned earlier. Is like, you can just liquidate all your assets, siphon into Bitcoin, hop on a plane, walk across a border. You can have $1 billion as 12 words in your head. So you can't stamp that out. It's not like in prior times, be it Syria or Germany or wherever, where when you were trying to escape, you had to leave your wealth behind you. You couldn't take gold bars, with you. You couldn't take your house with you, all that kind of stuff. But now you can. And so being that the ability to opt out is so easy now, then we're going to see jurisdictions pop up that those people are welcomed in, and they're going to leave in droves from those places that are becoming more and more and more overbearing and authoritarian in an attempt to stop this tide. And, the ones that recognize that earlier are probably going to get through the net, and they're going to do better. And the later you recognize that, to the point we made earlier, the more problems you're probably going to be faced with. And, we shall see how this goes. But this is the point of the discussion where, people think, oh, cool, new technology, it's the .com boom 2.0, like, oh, awesome, another chance to get rich.
It's a lot more than that. Yeah.
Sorry, guys. It's a little bit more tangly than that, and this is a profound civilizational shift. And I'm afraid it's acting as a redress for the corruption and the abuses that have happened up to this point in civilization. And, you kind of got to decide which side you're on. You kind of got to know your line in the sand. What are the principles and values that you hold most dearly?
You stand
and you will inconvenience yourself to stand up for.
I guess. Yeah. Wow. I agree. We're kind of like tumbling to this point. And I guess if I just extrapolate this out a little bit, we are going to head to a world where there's going to be some Bitcoin inside the regulated environment. There's going to be some Bitcoin out of it. Like, there's going to be these two worlds. And I think, because I think at some point, some of the government will just say, listen, if you're in this country or this jurisdiction, you have to put your Bitcoin where we can kind of keep our eyes on it. And there's going to be some Bitcoin that goes in there, and there's going to be some Bitcoin that's not in there. So I think we are going to head into a world where it's just like these two, part of it is quote unquote captured. I don't like saying that, but it'll
we're there
be
now.
operating.
We're there already.
Yeah, I guess we're there now. Yeah. I guess we're there now. You're right. Yeah.
Everyone's waiting on a US ETF as if that's going to be some sort of good thing.
Yeah.
And it seems like a good thing because look at Canada, right? A lot of people in Canada have heard about Bitcoin and they're, they want a little exposure, 1 to 5%. And then, the various ETFs that popped up in Canada, great. I can get some price exposure to this asset, but that's not what this asset is about. This asset is not about price exposure. Now, look, if you're into that, or if you fail to see the true value of it and you just want to balance out your portfolio with some price exposure, I mean, that's the game that's always been played, and it's your prerogative. But
it might serve for that. Yeah.
Right. Just do so under the understanding that you don't own that asset. Right. And so it could be taken from you at any time. The regulations could change. The custodian could go under. We're seeing what's happening in FTX, that they were playing games and they were making trades and they were taking risk with client funds. That can always happen because you don't own the asset. You own a claim on the asset. And a claim on the asset is just as good as nothing when it comes down to it, because those people, just to finish that point, like those custodians, the people that run the ETF, all that kind of stuff, it's in their best interest to serve you well, right? This is a whole open marketplace of service providers. So because if they treat you well, they get more business. But it's been the case time and time again. And probably with this asset in particular, it's going to be the case as we move forward. It's going to be so politically charged. And it's so also so easy to abscond with anonymously, that the incentive or the likelihood that relationship, that claim on that asset that you have is going to be violated at some point, the longer you wait, the more likely that is going to be. And so if you truly believe in the value of this asset and what it can produce both for yourself and in the world, the only sensible approach is to learn how to take custody of it yourself, and to do so immediately, especially in this environment. Because, and I promise this is the last point, but everyone thought FTX was like the blue chip of crypto exchanges, right? Its market cap was like 50 billion or whatever it was. Surely, and Tom Brady was promoting it on the Super Bowl ads. Surely this is a safe bet. I'm going to keep my money here. All those people talking about self-custody, like, I get it, but come on, what's going to happen? Boom. In the matter of a couple of days, because they were playing games in an unregulated market with client funds, they're done. They're insolvent, lost, they're 50 billion in debt or 10 billion in debt or whatever it is. And that can happen if you aren't the one that's in control of your money. And it's just the same lesson being taught time and time again in a different context, in a different time, in a different place, in a different way, but it's the same lesson ultimately. And people will do well to learn it as soon as possible.
Well, yeah, I think if anyone listens to anything, that last part about you saying taking custody might be some of the most important words you've spoken this whole time. Like, you have to take custody. There's one example, and I'll begin to wrap this in a minute here, but the UK about 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks ago now, John, I don't know if how closely you followed it. You probably did. The bond market or the gilt market there, they had some major problems. And one of the big financial custodians that was in charge of the investments and managing that for these pensioners in the UK, when there was no liquidity in that market and the bonds there started losing value, they basically got a margin call. I'm kind of summarizing really quickly here, but these pensions were investing on leverage. And then they got caught when the bonds that they were using as collateral lost value, and they had to recollateralize themselves. The market kind of froze up. And what happened there, it came out, there's like a Financial Times article, which basically says BlackRock was going to sell those pensions to cash. So if you were a pensioner and you thought in your pension, you maybe had a real estate investment trust, or you had exposure to some great energy companies, or you had exposure to oil, or whatever it is that you thought you owned as a real asset. When push comes to shove in a lot of the financial industry right now, if there's going to be a problem in that fiat system, they're just going to dump you to cash. Yeah. And that same week that they said they were going to sell those pensions to cash, the pound was getting absolutely annihilated. I don't know if you remember that week. It was probably 6-7 weeks ago now. The pound dropped dropped in value against the US dollar. I think maybe more in that week than in the history that they had been correlated or tracked together, some massive amount. So my thought process just went to, imagine you were a pensioner living in Spain that worked their whole life in England as a bus driver or something, and you had this pension fund. Then you're sold to cash, but you can't even get access to your cash because you don't custody it. To your point about custody, you can't even get access to it. And while you cannot get custody to it, the pound is losing value against the currency you might need it in, euros or US dollars. So when you eventually do get it, it's almost worth half of what you thought it was going to be. And that's all because you're not custodying your own assets. And we get into this a lot on just the value of real estate. And I know real estate, like you said, it's not mobile, it's not portable to all these things. You could be in a tax jurisdiction that's not kind to you. But one of the things we try to explain to people is that real estate, you have your name on it. It's not a REIT. Like if you have the property, it's your name on the title. It doesn't mean, you're not going to try to get taxed or something, but it does give you one closer step to having control of your own assets by owning the real estate directly in your name yourself. And Bitcoin, of course, takes this to the next level, to a level maybe we've never seen before, to 12 words in your head. And I think this idea of custody, I'm glad it's entering all of our conversations now. And I'm hoping that when people see something like FTX blow up and stuff, they're understanding that the whole system we exist in right now is a bigger version of FTX.
Absolutely.
We need to custody our assets. And that's ultimately what Bitcoin offers. We did do just a big cheerleading session, but I don't care, John. Like I'm cheerleading.
I love this stuff. But I mean, just to echo your sentiment, I mean, you're totally right. I don't know if you witnessed what happened with the yen, and Japan has been engaging in yield curve control to try to keep yields at 0.25%. And, I think on one day, the yen was dropping dramatically. So they deployed 50 billion US dollars to try to prop up the yen. It lasted for a day. I mean, again, go back to that conversation about capital destruction. How much would $50 billion do in terms of production and, in a market? And just to prop up this artificial fragile system, you deploy $50 billion and it gives you a day respite in the trend that you're trying to fight, the tide that you're trying to keep back. And then like a couple of days later, they announced that and they're experiencing inflation there and devaluation of the currency. They're doing a $200 billion US stimulus package to the people in order to try to help the economic situation. And you just think you're living in crazy world where all of these, asinine, irrational measures are being taken to try to prop up something that clearly is corrupted, right? Is clearly not working, and it needs to be resolved. And as again, to quote Jeff Booth, you can't fix the system from within the system. It's not predicated on the proper principles, and the architecture of the system is completely unfair and completely corrupted and completely distorted. And it's going to continue to produce these distortions in all different domains. I mean, a lot of people would decry or criticize the social circumstances in the world today, be it they're critical of the government or they're critical of something happening in the culture and that kind of stuff. And again, to our earlier point, they don't realize how much the relation that exists between what's happening in the world of money and what's happening in the world of culture. And they see these problems that are emerging as a result of trying to fix the system from within the system. And because that only makes everything worse, those problems aren't actually being resolved. If anything, they're just being shifted from one place to another. And then someone's, more than willing to take the credit for saying, see, look, we fixed it, it's done. And it just, the bobblehead or the alligator pops up somewhere else and you got to hit it down there. And so, we live in, first of all, I'm extremely
turbulent times. Yeah.
Turbulent, but I'm also insanely grateful for being alive right now.
Yeah.
Earlier in life, I kind of had that sentiment. I mean, it was always like the internet's cool and all that jazz, but you kind of felt like whatever that quote is, like born too early for, Rome and born too late for whatever, you kind of in a no man's land of history where nothing like really awesome is happening. And I think this is most likely the most significant civilizational shift that human civilization going back 6,000 years has ever contended with. And here we are, Tom, you and I, basically having a conversation that 0.001% of the global population would even be able to appreciate, probably, right? We're so early. And so on that point, perhaps my final thing to say is, for skeptics or for people for whom this all seems too hyperbolic, is to just zoom out, right? Like, there's a lot of chaos happening, and price, everyone gets emotional about investments and prices and that kind of stuff, but zoom out and try to get a broader perspective of what's happening here. And I don't just mean on like Bitcoin's price action. If you look at a 13-year log chart versus a 2-year chart, you're going to see a very different story being told. But I just mean on everything. Try to zoom out of the narrow political, the narrow economic, the narrow social worldview that you've cultivated over the course of your life, and try to broaden that out and allow for a new perspective to take shape. And I think that'll happen naturally, as we already talked about, if you try to understand Bitcoin. But I think that's what's needed right now, is that we need people to broaden their perspectives and try to ground them more in truth. And I think Bitcoin is a very useful tool in doing that. So,
Thanks,
everyone
John.
should get started on that journey, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, and you're playing a really great role in doing that for people. So I thank you. I mean, the content that you're putting out, whether it's via Twitter or through your podcast, you're doing a great job articulating things, and you're making people like myself think in different ways that I didn't think before. And that's helping me then articulate things to other people. So thank you for everything that you're doing. I really enjoyed, the article that you put out. I feel like it was recently, but maybe it was 6 months ago, but of monsters and maximalists. So whenever you get the urge to write again, please keep writing. I don't know if you've written since then or not, but please keep doing the writing.
I'm working on a book currently. So that's
are you?
most of
Okay,
my
I guess.
Time, yeah.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, that's fantastic. So where could people find you if they wanted to hear more things? Where would you direct them to?
I think Twitter is probably the best.
Okay.
And the website for the podcast is bitcoinrapidfire.com. And the conversations are anything but rapid. So that the name is kind of it's probably not named appropriately, but that's how it got its start.
It works.
But most of all, Tom, I just want to thank you for the work you're doing, because, we all stand on the shoulders of each other, because I'll listen to Sailor will listen to Gigi, Gigi will listen to VJ, you'll listen to whomever. And this is what makes all this so enjoyable, is because we're not all just trying to get rich here. Like, of course we want to enhance our financial situation, have more options in life and more security in life. But I think a lot of people are bought into a genuine cultural revolution that's happening. And as a result of that, and as a result of trying to understand Bitcoin and the role it plays in that, there's this intellectual fervor that's, I think it's really, really stimulating a lot of people, and it's delivering them to something that's, satisfying on a level that, they haven't had for a long time, if ever. And so here we all are, like, whether it's on these podcasts or on Twitter or wherever, and we're all just like slamming together these ideas, and these epiphanies are coming up all the time, right? And some of them, you think of them and you're like, surely that can't be accurate or true. Like, surely I'm just crazy. And then you throw it around with some other people, and maybe it needed some tweaking, but like, oh no, that's actually decent. And that's happening at such a rapid rate. I mean, I think of the discourse that's happening now versus 3 years ago, and it's radically different because there's so many brilliant people coming into this space.
Oh, that's interesting. So you've noticed the difference. Yeah, got it.
Absolutely. And so I just think it's awesome. And again, this is why I wanted to thank you for it, that we're all participating in this global conversation that is so so amazingly meaningful in terms of being able to deliver a positive impact to our lives as individuals, and then as we act out in the world, to the lives of the people that we care about, and even more broadly than that. And it's such a pleasure to participate in that, such an honor to do so. And so I thank you for your role in it and for having me on for a chat today.
Yeah, love it, John. Keep going. Thank you for this.
Will do, brother. Take care.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. You can find every new episode of the Your Life, Your Terms show on all the major streaming platforms. So Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. And if you'd like to get free copies of some of the books that we've put together, like these right here, or some of the reports that we've put together, like these right here, you can find all of those at www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's it for now. Until next time, your life, your terms.